For anyone with a modicum of empathy, the sight of these images in social media has been disturbing. Because here they are, young IDF soldiers, parading around the underwear of the women that they have expelled from their own homes. And while some of you might dismiss this as a desperate search for levity of young men in a theater of war, for me it reminded me of the power of symbols, and of the way that they can convey messages that are cross-cultural, cross-language. Specifically in this case, it reminded me of Assyrians, and Assyrian warfare to be specific. But rather than just speaking about Assyrian warfare, I'm going to take you to a place in which you're going to be able to see the symbols that I'm speaking about, of power, of dominance, face to face. And the place is, of course, the British Museum. The British Museum has one of the best collections in the world of Assyrian bas-reliefs. They were taken from the Palace of Nimrud, one of the first big cities of the Assyrian Empire, in what is now Iraq. They were transported to the British Museum in the 1840s, at a time when the Ottoman Empire that controlled the area of Iraq was in decline, and in which the British leveraged their considerable power to be able to plunder several archaeological sites and bring them back to the UK. Now, the Neo-Assyrian Empire started in 911 BCE and lasted until 609 BCE. It started in northern Iraq and eastern Syria, and it was the largest empire the world had ever known until that time. It occupied an area of 1.23 million square kilometers that went from Syria to Iraq to Iran, Kuwait, Jordan, and even Egypt. And the Neo-Assyrian Empire was defined by its military prowess. Every single man, regardless of class, served in the army. And it was this martial dedication that made it one of the greatest and most feared opponents in a field of war. And they knew it. And they capitalized on it. This is a group of people that were not just experts in using military weaponry, like siege engines, state-of-the-art chariots of war. They were also experts in psychological terror. They would spread propaganda of their atrocities before invading. To be able to deter any type of resistance, they would make examples of the cities that resisted, carrying out wholesale destruction and ethnic cleansing, so that when they approached the place, they would be so feared that the enemies would just surrender. Just listen to this excerpt of the Rassam Cylinder, the annals of Assyria's greatest king, Ashurbanipal II, in which he portrays the way in which he treated the kingdom of Elam that he subjugated. Trigger warning for explicit violence.
I destroyed, devastated, and burned with fire the city and its houses, from foundation to roof. I captured the wives of the king of the land of Elam. I tore off their heads with daggers. I cut off the hands of the soldiers in the middle of that city. I fed their bodies, cut into pieces, to dogs, pigs, wolves, and eagles, to the birds of the heavens and the fish of the deep. I built a pillar over against a city gate, and I flayed all the chief men who had revolted, and I covered the pillar with their skins. Some I walled up within the pillar. Some I impaled upon the pillar on stakes, and others I bound to stakes round about the pillar.
Bear in mind that this was a monument that was on display on the Palace of Nineveh, where every single person could see it. As a side note, I'm always surprised when I'm walking through the British Museum and I see families and children playing around these images of violence, of destruction. But I really shouldn't be. When the visitors in the British Museum view the engravings on the wall, what they see are the symbols of a long-dead civilization. For any client king, for any vassal that went to visit one of the Assyrian palaces at the time of their height, these would be symbols that they would easily recognize. The way in which Assyrians, who didn't have to pretend that they were the most moral army in the world, impressed their strength upon their enemies. Now, not a lot of women are actually depicted in scenes of warfare in ancient Assyria. The ones that are the captured victims of the cities that were plundered. And one thing that struck me about their representation is the way that it is a proxy for what they went through in practice. You see, the Assyrian customs wouldn't allow for the explicit representation of the horrors that female captives went through in a scenario of war. So they had to resort to symbols. So check these out. These are at the gates of the palace of Nimrud itself. And these are some of the images of women captured in a theater of war. Some of them seem to be wailing, but some of them are walking very specifically with their skirts raised in front of them. And according to Professor Megan Cifarelli, a renowned Assyriologist, what was hinted is as horrifying as you can expect. Let me read you this quote. The representations of non-Assyrian female captives with raised skirts therefore communicate more than simply the facilitation of walking. While these women are not revealing themselves in a sexually explicit manner, that is, they are not actually showing anything, we must remember that these representations were, after all, created for display in a public official setting. This gesture appears to be of sexually implicit exposure, a revelation of a small part of the female body that stood for the eroticized whole. As such, exposure was associated with contemporary texts with impropriety, humiliation, and destitution. In the visual record, it apparently signified the sexual availability of these women to the Assyrian male viewer. Now back to the present, but keep in mind all of the information that I gave you regarding Assyrian society, Assyrian warfare, and psychological warfare. In January 2022, the Jerusalem Post posted an article regarding sexual assault incidents in the IDF. The numbers were very stark. In January 2012, the incidence of sexual assault that had been reported to the leadership of the army was 524. By 2019, the numbers of reports had exploded to 1,319. And in 2020, the numbers continued escalating. Of the 1,542 complaints about sexual assault, 26 cases were cases of rape. 391 were considered obscene acts. 92 were related to the distributions of pictures, of films, of moments of intimacy of Israeli female soldiers. Of all of those cases, only 31 were indicted, revealing a pattern not only of sexual assault, but also of lax leadership. Another report, this one from Israel Hayom from 2021, revealed that reports of sexual assault and harassment climbed 24% on the previous number. And the reason for the climbing of these cases is positive. It means that people, female soldiers, are feeling empowered to be able to report these crimes. But it also shows that there is a systemic issue when it comes to sexual violence against women within the Israeli Defense Forces. Now look at these images again. Think of the words of Professor Megan Cifarelli regarding the availability of women. Think about Assyrian strategies of psychological warfare. Think about the levels of sexual assault that exist within the Israeli Defense Forces. Now tell me, what do you see here? Because I can tell you what I see. I see images that are planted to break the spirit of enemy combatants through the humiliation of their women. I see that the underwear that is picked for these pictures is underwear that evokes moments of intimacy. I see a group of young soldiers announcing to the men of Palestine that their women are available. I see them projecting into the world the idea that their chastity, that their modesty are lies.
So I'm going through these terrorist houses looking for guns and explosives like we found money. At every single house inside of Gaza, this is what I see, every single, unbelievable. 2 or 3 drawers stuffed with the most exotic laundry that you can imagine. Just loads of it. Every single house. Stuffed to the brim, look at that. Unbelievable. You know what? I don't even want to imagine what this stuff is, man. Oh, let me schmo. These naughty, naughty Gazans.
There are echoes in this of Orientalism and the way that women have been portrayed from the 19th century onwards by painters like Jean-Léon Gérôme, writers like Gustave Flaubert, like Pierre Loti, men who fetishize the action of unveiling women as a step to liberation. Liberation that always came with the connotation that they would deliver themselves sexually to them, that turned veiled women in the Middle East into a fetishized challenge, rather than people with wants, needs, cultural contexts, fully formed human beings that have the right to not give Western men, Western society in general, access. I see the violence that is announced, that is painted in luscious colors in the walls of palaces, but instead of walls of palaces at this moment, what we have is social media. I see a message being sent out to the world. But Eli, you say, Israel is the most moral army in the world. How can you make these accusations? It's not me making the accusations. It's the United Nations that consider that at this moment there are credible reports of sexual assault to Palestinian women and girls. It's the historical record. During the Nakba, the Israeli military was well known for spreading vicious rumors of sexual assault to encourage Palestinians to leave their lands, their properties, their homes, their lives. And much like with the Assyrian promise of violence, the propaganda that was spread by the Israeli forces in their process of ethnically cleansing Palestine was based on the bedrock of truth. In an article from June 2019, the newspaper Haaretz carried out extensive analysis in the process through which the government of Israel has been trying to systematically erase the evidence of the 1948 expulsion of Arabs. Malmab, secretive department from the Defense Ministry, has been scouring archives that have information that might be detrimental for the idea of the State of Israel, including information on the infamous massacre of Deir Yassim, or the incursion into the then Palestinian village of Safsaf, in which a contemporary writer confirms that Palestinian women, one as young as 14, was raped by the militias that then would form the IDF. And it did not stop with the Nakba. You have the reported stories of two women, Razmia Odeh and Aisha Odeh, who wrote their books about their experiences in the hands of the Shin Bet in 1969. Why is it so difficult to believe that these men are sending a message? As I said before, I am always a bit shocked when I prowl through the halls of the Nimrud Palace in the British Museum and I see families taking pictures with their children in front of images of abject horror and abject humiliation. Those women have no voices. That violence echoes only in the past. Do not let yourself become immune to the symbols of violence that are being perpetrated on a day-to-day basis in front of our eyes. Recognize the symbols for what they are.